Since around 2011, talks of a new Zelda game had begun to pique the interest of loyal fans. Lo and behold, after 6 more years of agonizing waiting, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild was released to fill the void that so many had for a fresh take on a 3-dimensional Zelda adventure. Now while I am quite late to the hype while making this video, I have been playing the game since its release, and after a long time of furthering my love for the game itself, I've decided to make a video on both its actual gameplay aspects and its relevance to video games today. So there's going to be 2 sections of this video. First I'm going to focus on the positives, and then I'm going to go into more of the negative aspects. But let's get right into those positive parts. First point. It's a breath of fresh air in the Zelda universe. Referring to the quote-unquote formula of most Zelda games, Breath of the Wild went against most of the tropes that 3D Zelda had established. I think the developers saw that the idea of dungeons presented in the previous way were getting boring. Before this game's establishment, it was always, talk to this guy, go do a fetch quest, he'll tell you about a dungeon, you have to do something to open the dungeon, you gotta get that item to complete the dungeon, shoot the eyes, shoot the glowy stuff, shoot or literally hit anything that stands out, get the big key, oh here it is, shoot the boss in the obvious spot where literally anyone with eyes can see. It's exhausting. It's overused and boring. But they finally saw the error of their ways with the last chronological game that they gave to us, and thank goodness. Now although I say that there was new stuff, it draws a lot of parallels to the first game. In case you haven't played it before, the first Legend of Zelda game looked like this. If you can't tell, the new game is a little bit different, but don't let the technological differences fool you. There was a sense of discovery, freshness, and mystery to the world that the player was placed in. Both games have this vital piece to them that makes each mechanic fun to explore. Third of all, the game is visually stunning. There isn't much that I have to say about this because visually the game speaks for itself. Now I'm no graphics expert or anything, but for a tiny cartridge on the Nintendo Switch to process something like this is astounding. Every moment that you're in the world of this game, I would argue, can be taken as a screenshot. It's gorgeous. Recently, I was introduced to Studio Ghibli movies, and I know I'm late to the bus, but I couldn't help but notice how similar the environment of Breath of the Wild looks to some of the drawn shots in the Ghibli films. The movement of the world just feels refreshing, and not many games are able to capture that magic. Next thing we're going into is the music. The sounds and music of Breath of the Wild is fantastic. Seamlessly, the music and sounds switch according to the environmental situations present. Characters, places, and battles all have their own theme, and while this is present in many games, Breath of the Wild does it exceptionally well. In a way, the previous point about visuals and this point about music work best when combined together. I'd liken it to having a film with a musical theme that fits visual elements. It adds to immersion, keeps it fresh, and places importance on the situation. Just look at one of the most popular film franchises of all time, Star Wars. Darth Vader is an icon in pop culture, and most people who know Darth Vader associate him with the Imperial March. Well, you could say the same for Breath of the Wild. Just listen and look at this. This next point is probably my favorite, and it's the fact that the world is alive while also feeling expansive and open. Since I've already covered the graphics, I think now it's time to mention that the graphics aren't the only part of the world that's positive. I've heard it likened to Shadow of the Colossus, and while I somewhat agree, I have to say that Breath of the Wild adds much more to the feeling of life. Yeah, Shadow of the Colossus's world is stylistically supposed to somewhat feel empty, but still, for how big the world of Hyrule can feel, it still seems realistic and fresh. There's so many nooks and crannies to it that are open for exploration. And this sense of life is much nicer than other open world games. You take a game like Grand Theft Auto 5's single player and go out into the forest or mountains, and it gets repetitive, and there's not really a point to it. With a game like Breath of the Wild, even the environment has importance. You can ride deer, collect materials for fire or armor enhancements, and find animals that serve special purposes as ingredients. It's an open world with intention, rather than filler content. Next on the list are the characters. The King, Impa, Link, Ganon, and Zelda all have either a ton of development or not much at all. This is good. To sort of explain this point, I want to refer back to previous Zelda games. Most of the main characters are very heavily expounded upon, and while that may not necessarily be a negative point, it can get a bit annoying. At this point, most people get the overall story of the Legend of Zelda series. The Triforce is a thing, Ganon is evil, and together Link and Zelda can beat him. It's kind of whatever at this point, but the crucial part of Breath of the Wild's storytelling has to do with motivation. The characters, especially Zelda, who I think is my favorite character in the game, get a reason to push forward. Before this, Zelda was a princess for the most part. It kind of fell in line with most of the stereotypical princess stories. However, this game makes Zelda a driven protector, struggling with finding her place in the world. Her and Link's narratives deal with the conflict between self and fate, the latter of which is one of the greatest themes of the past games. Breath of the Wild answers the "what if I don't want to be this person that everyone sees me to be" question, and it's just the one that everyone's been asking. Now, the King and Impa serve a side purpose in the main quest while also delivering exposition that is relatively concise. You don't even have to talk to Impa, you can just go fight Ganon after speaking to the King, and thank the genius who decided an evil monologue with Ganon was not necessary. He wants power. You don't have to know his motivation much other than that. While I like backstory about him, it gets repetitive in each game after a full 5 minutes of reading about how he wants to take over the world. We get it, he's evil. That's shown by his gross face. Now fight. Moving right along, there's a lot of neat little mechanics that aren't in your face. Gosh, there's so many little touches of life in everything. From the fire catching anything flammable, the electricity having properties, the Octorok balloons lifting stuff, and even the cuckoo gliding. It's genius, and it's not thrown at you in dialogue. The only tips you get are the ones in the loading screens or in little side quests. It makes the experience between the game and the missions provided more seamless. You aren't forced to do much with these types of things once they're introduced, and that gives the player even more freedom to do as he or she pleases. My next point is, it's the ragdoll physics. I cannot tell you how many times I have cackled while dealing with a Hylian lazily flopping down a set of stairs like week old syrup. Also, you get crazy stuff like this whenever you make a stupid move like I do. Enough said. Holy cow, we're on the combat system. Bouncing off of the whole getting smacked by that Molduga, Breath of the Wild doesn't exactly tell you what kind of a fight that you're getting into every time. There's a lot of enemy fighting style variation depending upon the types and skill levels of the opponents. No two fights are exactly the same in every way. The variation comes from the environmental and enemy grouping differences. Two bokoblins with the same colored skin in one place don't fight as the same as two in another. And as you progress in the game itself, the enemies can get much more difficult to deal with. Silver and gold skin enemies are a much different beast than their red counterparts, so gear up for a challenge. This is the part where I could mention Breath of the Wild as the Dark Souls of Zelda, but I kinda hate that stereotype because it doesn't explain how unique both games' combat systems really are to the game itself. If you make that comparison, it's fine, I just try to avoid it because each game should stand on its own. Also, Zelda did the combat system first. Moving right along are the Divine Beasts and their importance. Oh boy, so you've decided to do the main quest. Well, you are in for a treat because that old gross linear dungeon stuff is completely gone here. Once you get a Divine Beast map registered, it's more of a figure it out yourself dungeon. When you get it done, you get it done, and if you don't, bummer. The puzzles are intelligent and conform to the open world's physics without feeling like a completely separate piece of a game. I mean it is, but you still don't feel completely shut out of the world. A good example deals with Vadnaboris. The beast still moves around the desert world that you found it in, but now you're basically hitching a ride inside and around it. Even inside of the beast you can get a sense of the world around you, unlike previous Zelda games where the dungeon feels dreary and shut off completely from the outside world. Backtracking a bit, I want to mention the tutorial. and how it holds your hand, but not excessively. Breath of the Wild's tutorial is a fine example of a tutorial still being enjoyable. Sure, the mechanics are shown to you and the main button layout is placed on the screen, but you're able to deal with it once and then it's done. It sets the rules and it follows them. This part is especially evident in the first 4 shrines. The old man, being the cheeky, glider-hoarding geezer that he is, tells you to take on all of the dungeons present on the Great Plateau. In doing so, you gain all of your essentials that you need to complete the game. This is completely different from the old style of Zelda games where each separate dungeon possessed a crucial item to its completion. You're now given the tools that you need, an objective, and some backstory. Now go! Defeat Ganon and bring peace to the ladies and gents of Hyrule. Bouncing off of that last point, the shrines are a good start to introducing fresh problems to solve in different ways. After the first shrine orbs, it's up to you to complete however many you want. Now, it is necessary to have 13 hearts to get the Master Sword, and that's a good bit of shrine completion, but it isn't required of you to get the Sword of Evil's Bane to complete the main quest. Even after having the game for 3 years, I am still finding new pieces of it. A friend and I had a nice experience while playing Breath of the Wild together a few weeks back. I had never used or seen the floaty Octorok platforms before then, and just some random shrine had it in there. I was surprised, but extremely happy that I got to experience that piece of the game without some random guy being like, "Halt! Did you know that these balloons and platforms and da-da-da with the thing and the—" I get it, let me do the mission, thank you. Okay, I'm out of breath, but now that we've done the best parts, I have to move on to the negative. I can't just say what I like and move on. If people can make a game this good, I know that they can improve certain parts too. Now the shrines, depending upon the individual, can get repetitive. Yes, there are rules that are followed and mechanics that differ, but I know that some people see the shrines as busy work. They can get repetitive, and some of the shrine quests follow the good old mandatory fetch quest formula. Most of these fetch quests end with the shrine being revealed. However, the insides of the shrine tend to be filled with a chest and a straight shot to the shrine's orb. While it may seem like this empty shrine is a reward, it can feel a little bit lazy at times. I personally like the problem solving and the challenge involved with the shrine, and not having that kinda sucks. Now, touching on those fetch quests again, they still exist, even if they are mostly side quests. They can get annoying. There, I said it. I don't want to get this girl ice, or a gem, or give some dude a picture of something. That's not fun. It feels like homework before a reward. Hey, Jimmy, do your homework, and then you'll get ice cream afterwards. No, that's stupid. I want the ice cream now. The ice cream in this case usually comes in the form of a shrine, but we already talked about that whole deal, so I won't go back into it and bore you all with my nonsense of whatever I can talk about in my head. Going more into the actual gameplay, the Divine Beast boss fights can be easy depending upon your gameplay style. I won't lie, they're kind of pushovers. Save for Thunderblight if you're in early game. He's kind of a monster. Once you get used to the combat style, it doesn't take much to learn the patterns of the bosses. This does not mean that you can't be creative with it. I'm just saying that sometimes there are lulls in the Blight's actions that could be filled with fast-paced movement or more varied attacks. I think that could overall improve the experience of the game player. It would be more difficult while still being fun and engaging. Finally, Dark Beast Ganon is way too easy. This final point for the video is probably the saddest to me. The final form of Ganon, Dark Beast Ganon, Piggy McGee, is the easiest fight in the game. The fight looked epic, and not in the jokey, epic sort of way, but rather in the visually and emotionally investing way. If I may be so bold, I would suggest changing the fight to maybe a different camera angle for an easy fix. The better option, in my opinion, would be to just have better attacks. The more I think about the fight, I realize that I have only noticed about one attack consistently used. This point is so upsetting to me because the first phase of Ganon, Calamity Ganon, is both terrifying and a good challenge. Even with all 4 Divine Beasts, Calamity Ganon can be a handful if you're not prepared. They just missed the mark with his Dark Beast form, which could have been the best boss fight of the entire Zelda series. Okay, I'm done. And sure, these parts are not great, but overall, The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild is going to be considered a classic as time moves on. Of course, there is a sequel in the works, but this does slightly concern me with the repetitive aspects that made the other 3D Zelda games so similar and relatively monotonous after a while. With this being said, I'm in love with the experience that I had with this game, and the best parts of Breath of the Wild should be savored and taken care of. If you want a fun game to learn on your own, I highly recommend it. Finish the tutorial, get into the world, and experience Breath of the Wild for what it is, a masterpiece. Whew! Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed what you heard and what you saw. Voice your opinion down in the comments below on what you think of Breath of the Wild. Thanks again.